housekeeper stood at the threshold of the ancient iron-bound manor, her tears falling like shattered diamonds upon the cold stone floor. Gabriel froze his immortal heart, which had beat with a slow, icy rhythm for centuries, suddenly skipping a frantic beat. Julianne had always been the pillar of strength in this shadowed estate, but now she was crumbling before his very eyes. She covered her face with a trembling hand, her breath hitched and suffocated by an invisible weight that he, for all his dark wisdom as the vampire king, could not comprehend. He knew with a sudden, terrifying clarity that losing her would be losing the last fragment of light in his eternal life. "Julianne, wait," he whispered, his voice emerging like a rough rasp of velvet against the silence of the hall. She stopped, her frame tensing, but she did not turn to face him. Her shoulders remained hunched, her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles were as pale as his own marble skin. Gabriel stepped forward with the grace of a predator, yet his movements were tentative, as if he feared she might vanish into the mist if he moved with too much haste. He reached out his hand, hovering near her shoulder, but never touching, feeling the warmth of her human blood radiating through the air. "Please explain to me what is happening. What have I done to cause this sorrow?" He asked, his golden eyes searching the back of her head for answers she had yet to give. Julianne closed her eyes tightly, the darkness behind her lids a mirror to the shadows of the manor. She wanted to scream to let the walls of Greystone Manor hear the depth of her despair, but she forced a semblance of control. When she finally turned, her eyes were red from weeping, meeting his gaze with a fierce, wounded intensity. "It was nothing you did." "Your Grace," she murmured, "it is simply that I can no longer remain. I cannot stay here and continue pretending that everything is fine." Gabriel furrowed his brow, his regal features etched with a confusion that felt foreign to a king of the night. "Pretending what, Julianne? I do not understand the riddle you are weaving," he replied, his voice low and laden with an ancient sadness. She let out a bitter, hollow laugh that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. "You do not need to understand," she said, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. "You only need to let me go." He shook his head with a desperation that bordered on the human. "No, I will not let you walk out that door. Not without knowing what is hurting you so deeply. Speak to me, Julianne. Give me the truth that you have hidden behind your diligent service." She bit her lower lip, trying to stem the tide of tears that threatened to drown her once more, standing amidst the grandeur of a hall that had been her world for 3 long years. Julianne had arrived at Greystone Manor shortly after the passing of Gabriel's beloved Queen Madeline. At that time, the house was a ruin of grief, a hollowed-out shell mirroring its master's soul. Gabriel had been destroyed by the loss, his vampiric power flickering like a dying candle, unable to find the strength to leave his velvet-shrouded chambers. Julianne had entered that darkness during his most somber hour, and slowly, with the quiet persistence of the dawn, she had brought order, cleanliness, and a routine that anchored him to the world. She cared for the sprawling manor as if it were her own ancestral home, and she cared for Gabriel as if she were the sole guardian of his flickering spark of life. In the midst of that quiet devotion, without realizing the danger, she had fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with the King of Shadows. It had happened slowly, a silent accumulation of moments that eventually became an avalanche. Every cup of tea she prepared with meticulous care, every meal she left warming by the hearth, every time he thanked her with that tired but sincere gaze that seemed to pierce her soul. It was in the brief conversations they shared in the candlelit corridors, and in the rare ghost-like smiles he offered when he thought no one was watching. Julianne had given her heart away piece by piece, and now the weight of it was too much to bear. It pained her to be so close, and yet so infinitely far. It hurt to see him every day knowing she would never be anything more to him than the girl who kept the dust from his books and the darkness from his breakfast. It was an agony to love a king who lived in a past she could never share. "I have fallen in love with you, Gabriel." She finally whispered the words escaping her lips before she could call them back. The silence that followed was absolute, a heavy shroud that seemed to stop the very ticking of the clocks. Gabriel remained motionless, his eyes widening as he processed the confession that had just shattered the air between them. His breath, though unnecessary for his survival, stopped completely. Julianne covered her mouth with her hand, more tears spilling over as the reality of her words took hold. "I know it is wrong. I know I should not feel this way. But I tried, Gabriel. I tried to ignore it, to forget to pretend that my heart did not ache every time you walked into the room. But I cannot do it anymore. I cannot stay here knowing that nothing will ever change between us. I must leave before I lose what little remains of myself." Gabriel stood there paralyzed by the weight of her words. His heart, usually so still, beat with an uncoordinated rhythm that felt like thunder in his chest. He did not know what to say, for he had spent centuries perfecting the art of emotional distance. Julianne waited for a reaction, for a rejection, or perhaps for a miracle, but he only stood there staring at her as if he were seeing a stranger for the first time. In that silence, she found her answer. She nodded slowly, wiping her face with a final shaky breath. She turned to leave, her footsteps echoing on the stone. "Julianne, wait," he said, his hand catching her arm with a gentleness that felt like a brand. She stopped, but did not look back. She did not have the courage to see the pity in his eyes. "I do not know what to say in this moment," he admitted, his voice shaking with an uncharacteristic tremor. "I did not expect this. I did not expect anything like this at all." Julianne pulled her arm back, her touch gentle but firm, as she detached herself from his grip. "You do not need to say anything, Gabriel. I understand. I have always understood the distance between a king and his servant." She took another step toward the darkness of the foyer, but he caught her again, this time with a strength that spoke of his true nature. "No, you do not understand," he insisted, his eyes damp and lost. "I have spent the last 3 years just trying to survive the night. I was trying not to fall apart, trying to be strong when I was nothing but dust and echoes. And you were here. You were always here, tending to the house, tending to me. I never stopped to think what that meant. I never stopped to truly see the woman behind the service." Julianne felt her chest tighten with a pain so sharp it felt like a physical blow. "Gabriel, please do not make this more difficult than it already is," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the strain of her emotions. He released her arm and ran his hands through his dark hair, a gesture of sheer human frustration. "I do not want you to go," he said, his eyes burning with a desperate intensity. "I cannot let you leave this house." She shook her head, the tears flowing freely now, unbidden and unstoppable. "This is not about what you want anymore, Gabriel. It is about what I need. And I need distance. I need space to breathe, to forget the scent of sandalwood that follows you, to move on from a dream that was never mine to have." Gabriel stepped back, the weight of her words sinking into his immortal bones like lead. Julianne turned and walked toward her small room at the rear of the manor, her mind focused on packing her few belongings before her resolve crumbled entirely. Gabriel remained standing in the corridor, a broken king in a hollow castle, trying to grasp the reality of the last 5 minutes. His legs felt heavy, as if the earth itself were trying to pull him down. Julianne was leaving. Julianne loved him, and he had done nothing to stop her departure. He stumbled into his study and collapsed into the high-backed velvet armchair. His head throbbed with a dull ache, and his heart raced like a trapped bird. He looked around the room that Julianne kept so impeccably, and for the first time the silence of the manor felt suffocating. She had been the soul of Greystone, the one who saw to every detail. He looked at the fresh lilies on his desk, the perfectly pressed curtains, and the list of supplies written in her elegant flowing script. She was in every corner, every shadow, and every ray of moonlight that hit the polished floors. Julianne was the heart that kept the manor beating, and he had been too blind to notice. Gabriel closed his eyes and leaned his head back, the image of Madeleine appearing in his mind. She had been the light of his existence, the woman he had sworn to love across the centuries. When she died, he had died with her. He had spent decades wallowing in guilt for being the one who continued to walk the earth for breathing when she could not. He had locked himself in a prison of grief and memory, and Julianne had been there, a quiet presence in the background, asking for nothing while giving everything. He opened his eyes and looked at the silver-framed portrait of Madeleine on the mantel. Her smile was frozen in a time of joy that felt like a lifetime ago. "What do I do now, my love?" he whispered to the portrait, as if his dead queen could offer guidance from the beyond. But the manor remained silent, a heavy, oppressive silence that had never been there before, because Julianne's gentle footsteps always filled the void. In her room, Julianne was stuffing her meager wardrobe into a worn suitcase, her hands shaking so much she could barely fold the cloth. She loved this house, she loved the routine, and she loved Gabriel with a ferocity that frightened her. She loved the way he would lose himself in his ancient maps. She loved the way he thanked her for the simplest of tasks. She loved the rare, genuine smiles that transformed his face from a mask of sorrow to something breathtakingly beautiful. She loved how he tried to be strong for his subjects, even when he was falling apart inside. She closed her suitcase and looked around the small room that had been her sanctuary for 3 years. 3 years of silence, 3 years of service, and 3 years of loving a man who lived in the shadows. She picked up the suitcase and stepped out into the hall where Gabriel was waiting, blocking her path, like a ghost from a dream. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale even for a vampire. "Julianne, please stay, just one more night." He begged, his voice a low plea. "Let us speak properly, when the sun sets tomorrow. Do not leave like this." She shook her head, her jaw set in a line of painful determination. "If I stay, I will never find the strength to leave. I must go now, while I still have the courage." He stepped closer, his voice rising in desperation. "Give me time, Julianne. Give me a chance to process all of this, to understand what it is I truly feel." She let out a sad, weary laugh. "You do not need to understand anything, Gabriel. This is my burden to carry, not yours. My heart is my own problem." Gabriel reached out and cupped her face with his cool hands, forcing her to look into the depths of his golden eyes. "It is not just yours, because I do not want you to go," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And it is not because I need someone to tend to the fire or cook the meals. It is because I do not know how to exist in this world without you here." Julianne felt her knees weaken at his touch. She wanted to believe him so badly. She wanted to fall into his arms and forget the pain, but she could not. "You are confused, Gabriel. You are afraid of the loneliness returning to these halls, but it is not about me. It is about having someone, anyone, to fill the silence." and I cannot be just a shadow in your house anymore." Gabriel let go of her face, his frustration boiling over. "Then, what would you have me say? That I love you, that I feel the same? I do not know, Julianne. I truly do not know what I feel. Everything is a storm inside me, but I know that I do not want you to walk through that gate." She took a step back, creating a distance that felt like a canyon between them. "When you know what you feel, if that day ever comes, you know where to find me. But I will not stay here waiting for a miracle that may never happen." Julianne brushed past him, her suitcase heavy in her hand, and walked toward the front door. Gabriel followed her, unable to stop her, yet unable to find the words to make her stay for the right reasons. She opened the massive front door and paused for a heartbeat, looking back at the manor one last time. "Thank you for everything, Gabriel. Please take care of yourself," she said softly. And then she was gone. She descended the stone steps, crossed the iron gate, and walked down the path toward the town of Greenville, without looking back. Gabriel stood on the threshold, watching her figure grow smaller and smaller against the gray horizon. Only when she turned the corner and vanished from his sight did he feel the true weight of the loss. It was a weight he knew well, the same crushing pressure he had felt when Madeline died. But this was different. This was a loss he could have prevented. He returned to the interior of the manor and closed the door, the sound echoing through the empty halls like a funeral bell. The house was silent, a heavy, suffocating silence that was different from any he had felt before. It was as if the very walls knew that Julianne was gone, as if the ancient stone of the manor mourned her absence. Gabriel walked into the kitchen. The cup of coffee she had prepared for him that morning still sat on the counter, cold and forgotten. The dishcloth was folded with perfection. The grocery list written in her neat hand was still pinned to the refrigerator. He saw her ghost in every corner, in every object, and he felt a void opening up in his chest that threatened to swallow him whole. He opened the refrigerator and saw the containers she had organized, meals prepared for the entire week. Even in her heartbreak, even as she was leaving, Julianne had seen to his needs. She had cared for him until the very last second. Gabriel closed the refrigerator and leaned his hands on the counter, his head hanging low as he tried to find air. "What have I done?" he whispered to the empty room. He spent the entire night awake, sitting in the armchair in his study, staring into the darkness. His mind was a whirlpool of confusion and regret. Julianne loved him. Julianine, who had always been there, who had been more than a servant, even if he had been too arrogant or too broken to see it. He thought of every moment they had shared over the last 3 years, and for the first time he truly saw her. He saw the way her eyes lit up when he praised her cooking. He saw the way she worried when he stayed up late working on his accounts, always leaving a tray of food by his side. He saw the way she tended to the manor, as if it were a living thing, as if her care was the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. He saw the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching, that gaze filled with a tenderness he had been too afraid to name. He realized then that she had been in love with him for a long time, and he had been a fool, trapped in a mourning that had become his identity. Gabriel rose from his chair as the first light of dawn touched the window panes. He had not slept, had not fed, had only thought. He walked to his bedroom and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling as the tears of an immortal finally fell. They were tears of regret, of confusion, and of a burgeoning hope he was terrified to acknowledge. "Madeline, I do not know what to do," he whispered into the morning light. "I do not know if it is right to feel again. I do not know if I am betraying your memory. Please give me a sign." But the room remained silent, and perhaps Gabriel thought that silence was the answer. Perhaps Madeline was telling him that it was time to let go, that he deserved to live again. The days began to pass slow and gray and hollow. Gabriel tried to maintain the routine Julianne had established. He woke, he bathed, he attended to his duties, but everything felt mechanical and devoid of color. After the first week, he hired a new housekeeper, a woman named Clara. She was older, efficient, and professional. She arrived at 7 in the morning and left at 5 in the evening. She did everything correctly. The house was clean, the meals were prepared, the clothes were laundered. But it was not the same. The manor was clean, but it felt dead. The food was nourishing, but it had no flavor. Clara did not put fresh flowers on the table, she did not fold the linens with that special touch, and she did not leave kind notes reminding him of small things. Gabriel began to realize how much Julianne had gone above and beyond her duties. He saw how much of herself she had poured into every detail, how it hadn't been just a job for her, but an act of constant, quiet love. 2 weeks after her departure, Gabriel was in his study when his phone rang. It was his brother Thomas, a fellow vampire who lived in the bustling city of Newark. "How are you, brother?" "It has been far too long since we spoke," Thomas said, his voice vibrant and full of life. Gabriel sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "I am surviving, more or less," he replied. Thomas caught the heavy tone immediately. "What is wrong, Gabriel? You sound as if the sun has finally caught up with you." Gabriel hesitated. He hadn't told anyone about Julianne or the confession at the door. But hearing his brother's voice, he felt the need to unburden himself. "Julianne resigned," he said simply. "She left 2 weeks ago." Thomas paused on the other end of the line. "Your housekeeper. Why did something happen between you?" Gabriel took a deep breath. "She told me she was in love with me. She said she couldn't stay because it hurt too much to be near me. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. And I let her walk away." Thomas whistled low. "Well, I certainly didn't expect that. But tell me, Gabriel, what do you feel for her?" Gabriel closed his eyes. It was the question he had been asking himself every hour of every day. "I do not know, Thomas. I truly do not know." His brother gave a short, dry laugh. "Can I be honest with you, brother? You have been a prisoner for 3 years. You have been locked in a cell of guilt and sorrow. I loved Madeline. We all did, but she is gone. You are still here. You are still existing. Finding someone who makes you feel something again is not a betrayal. It is a gift. It is life trying to find its way back to you." Gabriel felt a knot form in his throat. "And what if I do not know how to be that person again?" Thomas spoke with a gentleness that was rare for him. "No one knows, Gabriel. We all just stumble in the dark, hoping to find a hand to hold. But you won't find anything if you don't try. And from the way you're talking about her, I think you already know the answer. You're just afraid to admit it. Afraid of what Gabriel asked. Afraid of being happy, Thomas replied. Afraid that if you love someone else, you're erasing what you had with Madeline. But love doesn't work that way. It doesn't subtract. It only adds. Madeline will always have her place, but that doesn't mean your heart is full." Gabriel hung up the phone and sat in the silence of the night, Thomas's words echoing in his mind. He knew his brother was right. He knew he was afraid of moving forward, afraid that happiness would come with a price of guilt. That night, Gabriel did something he hadn't done in years. He retrieved the box of photographs of Madeline from the top of his wardrobe. He sat on the floor of the parlor and opened it. There were photos of their wedding, their travels across the globe and small everyday moments of laughter. He looked at each one with affection and longing, but also with a new sense of acceptance. Madeline had been the woman of his life, but she was no longer here. The world continued to turn, and he needed to turn with it. Madeline, he said to his favorite photo, where she was laughing with her eyes closed against a coastal breeze, I will always love you. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. But I need to try to live again. And I think Julianne is the one who can show me how. She makes me feel things I haven't felt in a century. She makes me want to wake up and see the world. I need your permission to be happy. He looked at the photo, and at that moment a soft wind blew through the open window, catching the curtains Julianne used to adjust so carefully. Gabriel smiled a small, sad but real smile. "Thank you, my love," he whispered. He put the photos away and looked at the clock. It was 10 o'clock at night, 3 weeks since Julianne had left. 3 weeks of emptiness and regret. He could not stand it for another minute. Gabriel grabbed his phone and called the only person who might know where Julianne was, Rosemary, the neighbor who often chatted with her at the garden gate. "Rosemary, it is Gabriel. I apologize for the late hour, but do you have Julianne's number?" There was a long silence. "I do, Gabriel, but I must ask why. I need to speak with her. It is of the utmost importance." Rosemary sighed. "She is not well, Gabriel. She is suffering. If you are going to speak to her, please be sure of what you are going to say. Do not hurt that girl again." "I won't, I promise," Gabriel said. Rosemary gave him the number, and he stared at it on the screen for several minutes. His heart was hammering against his ribs, and his hands were cold. He was terrified. Terrified that he was too late. Terrified that she wouldn't want to hear from him, and terrified that he had destroyed his only chance at a new beginning. But he had to try. He pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then her voice answered. "Hello?" Gabriel closed his eyes, relief washing over him at the mere sound of her. "Julianne, it is I, Gabriel." There was a long, heavy silence, and then her voice came through trembling. "Gabriel, why are you calling? I need to see you," he said, his voice urgent. "I need to talk to you, please." Julianne hesitated. "I have already said everything I had to say. There is nothing left to discuss." "But I haven't said anything," Gabriel countered. "I haven't said any of the things I should have said, and I am regretting it every day. Please, Julianne, give me one chance. Just one conversation. If you want me to disappear after that, I will. But let me try." Julianne was silent, and he could hear her ragged breathing on the other end. "All right," she whispered. "Tomorrow, 3 in the afternoon at the bakery near the square. I will be there." Gabriel did not sleep that night. He spent the hours rehearsing what he would say, how he would say it. Every word felt insufficient. Every sentence felt too small to contain the storm of emotions brewing within him. He bathed at 5 in the morning, even though the meeting was not until the afternoon. He changed his clothes 3 times, straightened his hair, and then messed it up again. He was nervous in a way he hadn't been in decades. By 2:30, he was already at the bakery. He sat at a corner table facing the door, a cup of coffee untouched before him. His heart beat so loudly he was sure the other patrons could hear it. 3 o'clock came and went. Julianne had not arrived. Gabriel checked his watch, his anxiety spiraling. What if she had changed her mind? What if she had decided he wasn't worth the pain? Then the door opened, and she walked in. Gabriel felt the air leave his lungs. Julianne looked different. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She wore a simple light blue dress, looking not like the housekeeper he was used to, but like a woman who belonged in the sun. She was beautiful. Their eyes met, and she hesitated for a moment before walking to the table. Gabriel stood up so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. "Hello," was all he could manage. "Hello," she replied softly, sitting across from him. She kept her hands in her lap, her eyes avoiding his. They sat in silence for a few seconds that felt like eternity. He didn't know where to begin. "How have you been?" he finally asked. Julianne gave a sad smile. "Surviving." "And you terrible!" He admitted his honesty, making her look up. "Everything has been terrible since you left. The manor is not the same. I am not the same." She looked away again. "You will get used to it. It is just a matter of time." "I do not want to get used to it," he said firmly. "I do not want to learn how to live without you." Julianne closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "Gabriel, please do not do this. Do not give me hope if it isn't real." "It isn't false hope, Julianne. Everything I want to tell you is the truth." She opened her eyes and looked directly at him, her gaze filled with weariness and fear. "Then say it. Say what you need to say so that I can leave." Gabriel swallowed hard. "I was a coward," he began. "When you told me how you felt, I froze. I was in shock, and I was afraid. I let you walk away without saying a word, and I have hated myself for it every single day since." Julianne gripped her hands in her lap, her knuckles white. "You don't need to apologize. I understand. It wasn't what you wanted to hear. It wasn't that he said. I spent these weeks thinking about you, about us, about everything. And I realized that I was so buried in the past, so tethered to the grief of losing Madeline, that I missed the present. I didn't see you. I didn't see everything you were doing for me, or how important you had become." Julianne felt the tears threatening to fall. "That doesn't change things, Gabriel. Missing me doesn't mean you feel what I feel." "You are right," he agreed, and her heart sank. But he continued, "I do not know if I love you in the same way yet, but I know that I feel something powerful, something that makes me wake up thinking of you, something that makes the house feel like a tomb without you. I want to find out what this is, but I cannot do it alone." Julianne shook her head, tears finally spilling over. "I cannot be your experiment, Gabriel. I cannot be the person you use to see if you can love again. I have already been hurt enough." It was the first time she hadn't called him Your Grace or Sir, and the sound of his name from her lips moved him deeply. He reached across the table and took her hands. She tried to pull away, but he held on with a gentle determination. "You are not an experiment. You are real, and what I feel is real. I am terrified of not being enough for you, but I am more afraid of never trying, of letting you go, and spending eternity wondering what could have been." Julianne was sobbing now, but she didn't pull her hands away. "And Madeline, how do you know you aren't just trying to replace her?" Gabriel squeezed her hands tenderly. "Because I spoke to her memory. I looked at our past, and I realized that my love for her will always exist, but it doesn't mean my heart is closed. Madeline would want me to live, and I think that is what I am trying to do now. With you." Julianne closed her eyes, his words breaking through her defenses. "I am so afraid, Gabriel. I am too," he whispered. "But we can be afraid together. We can try slowly, at your pace." She nodded, a small smile appearing through her tears. "All right. We try." They stayed at the bakery for 2 more hours, talking about their fears, their dreams, and the uncertain future. Julianne told him how hard it had been to hide her feelings, how every day was a battle between wanting to be near him and wanting to protect herself. Gabriel spoke of the guilt he had carried, how he thought he didn't deserve happiness after Madeline. The barriers were falling and the smiles were becoming easier. When they stood outside the bakery, Gabriel held her hand. "Can I call you tomorrow?" Julianne squeezed back. "You can? Can I see you again?" "Dinner, perhaps." She smiled. "You can." He pulled her into a long, tight embrace. In the days that followed, they began to reconnect with caution. Gabriel called every day, and they would talk for hours. He took her to a small, cozy restaurant where they laughed over mundane things. He discovered Julianne loved to read, and he had never even asked her what her favorite books were. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked. "I didn't think it was important," she replied. "I was there to work." Gabriel shook his head. "You were always more than that." 2 weeks later, he appeared at her apartment with a bag of books. 5 new novels by her favorite authors. Her eyes filled with tears. "Gabriel, you didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said. "I want to know every part of you." A month after their meeting at the bakery, they were walking through the park under a starry sky. Gabriel stopped in front of a bench and took her hands. "Julianne, there is something I must ask you." She looked at him with curiosity. "What is it?" "I want you to come back to Greystone Manor," he said, his voice steady. "But not as my housekeeper. Never again as a servant. I want you to return as the woman who shares my life. I want you to be my partner." Julianne's heart raced. "Gabriel, I know it is soon," he said, "but I am certain of one thing: I do not want to spend another day without you. I want to build something real with you." Julianne was crying again, but these were tears of pure joy. "Are you sure? Absolutely sure?" "I have never been more certain of anything," he replied. "I love you, Julianne." The words hit her like a beautiful wave. "You love me, I do. It took me too long to see it, but I love everything about you, and I want to spend my life proving it to you." Julianne threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at once. "I love you too. I have loved you for so long." They embraced, and Gabriel felt a peace he hadn't known in centuries. He felt he was exactly where he was meant to be. Julianne moved back to the manor a week later, but everything was different. She didn't enter through the service entrance. She walked through the front door hand in hand with the king. Her belongings didn't go to the small room in the back. They went to the master's suite. Gabriel had cleared half of his wardrobe for her and even bought her new silk-lined hangers. "You did this?" she asked, touched. "I wanted you to feel at home," he said. They spent the first few days adapting to their new reality. Julianne had to remind herself she didn't need to wake up at 5 to start the chores. Gabriel had to learn how to share his space and his life. They cooked together, and Gabriel famously burned the first pot of rice he ever touched. Julianne laughed so hard she cried. "I am terrible at this," he grumbled. "We will learn together," she said, kissing his cheek. They spent their evenings talking and watching films, and when they went to sleep, Julianne would curl into his arms, feeling safe and cherished. "Are you happy?" Gabriel asked one night in the dark. "Very," she replied. "And you more than I ever thought possible." 2 months later, Gabriel took her to meet his mother, Hesper. She was an ancient vampire of regal bearing, and the meeting was tense at first. Hesper looked at Julianne with a critical eye, questioning her background and her intentions. When Julianne went to the kitchen to help with dessert, she overheard Hesper speaking to Gabriel in the parlor. "Gabriel, are you certain she was your servant? What will our kind say?" Gabriel's voice was firm and unwavering. "Mother, I do not care what they say. I care about how she makes me feel. She has brought me back to life, and I will not let her go." Julianne felt a surge of love for him. She returned to the room, and eventually Hesper began to thaw, seeing the genuine love between them. The months turned into a year, and their love only deepened. They created new routines and shared new dreams. 6 months after she moved back, Gabriel planned a special evening in the manor gardens. He had hung lights in the trees and scattered rose petals along the path. Under the stars, he knelt before her. "Julianne, you brought color back to my world. You are my beginning and my forever. Will you marry me?" Julianne sobbed with happiness as she said yes. They were married in a small ceremony in the very same garden, surrounded by the few people who truly mattered. A year later, Julianne discovered she was pregnant. It was a miracle that neither of them had expected a bridge between the mortal and the immortal. Gabriel was overjoyed and terrified all at once. He spent the months of her pregnancy tending to her every need, talking to her growing belly, and singing to the life they had created together. When their daughter Helena was born, Gabriel cried as he held her for the first time. She was a symbol of their triumph over grief, and the proof that love could transcend even the boundaries of life and death. As the years passed, they watched Helena grow into a beautiful, spirited young woman. Greystone Manor was no longer a tomb of memories. It was a home filled with laughter and light. Gabriel and Julianne would often sit in the garden watching the sunset, knowing that they had fought for every moment of their happiness. They had learned that the heart is capable of healing no matter how deep the wounds, and that love is the only force powerful enough to turn the darkness into dawn. They were a king and his queen, bound not by duty, but by a love that had stood the test of time. Looking back on the journey that brought them to this peaceful twilight, one realizes that the most profound transformations often begin in the quietest moments of despair. Gabriel and Julianne's story teaches us that grief, while a formidable and heavy shroud, is not an eternal sentence. It is a season of the soul, a cold winter, that if met with patience and compassion, eventually gives way to the warmth of a new spring. We often believe that once we have lost our great love, the capacity to feel again is extinguished forever. Yet the heart is like the earth itself. It possesses a hidden resilience, a capacity to bloom again when tended to by a gentle and persistent hand. Julianne did not seek to replace what was lost, nor did she demand that Gabriel forget his past. Instead, she offered him the grace of the present, the simple beauty of being seen and cared for without expectation. Her love was a quiet revolution, proving that true devotion is found not in grand gestures, but in the steadfastness of one's presence. Gabriel, in turn, had to learn the hardest lesson of all, that letting go of a ghost is not an act of betrayal, but an act of honor toward the living. To love again is to affirm that the beauty of what once was can coexist with the beauty of what is yet to be. It is the understanding that our capacity to love is infinite, and that each new person we cherish adds a new room to the mansion of our heart, rather than replacing the old ones. For those who have walked through the long shadows of loss, this story serves as a reminder that vulnerability is not a weakness, but the very gateway to connection. To risk one's heart again after it has been shattered requires a courage far greater than any physical battle. It is an invitation to trust in the inherent goodness of life, even when the evidence of the past suggests otherwise. We are all, in a sense, like Greystone Manor vessels that can either be filled with the dust of yesterday or the light of today. The choice lies in our willingness to open the door to speak the truth of our hearts and to embrace the miracle of a second chance. Love, in its truest form, is a healing balm that bridges the gaps between different worlds, making the impossible real and the broken whole once more. It is the legacy we leave behind not in stone or title, but in the warmth we share and the hope we kindle in the souls of others.